Imagine opening a letter from your bank, right?
Yeah.
And it's telling you your checking account is overdrawn.
Oh, that is never a good feeling.
No, not at all. But instead of, slapping you with a $30 penalty fee and a threat to close your account, the bank manager has actually written you a handwritten note.
Wait, a handwritten note?
Yeah, a note just asking, are you doing okay? Do you have enough food in your fridge this week?
Wow. That scenario sounds completely absurd.
It really does, doesn't it? Because our entire society is built on this premise that when the numbers drop, the alarms sound, the spreadsheets come out, and the institution basically tightens the screws on whoever is falling behind.
Yeah, well, it is the standard crisis response, really. Like, when any organization faces a financial shortfall, the focus just narrows entirely to the red ink.
Exactly.
The institutional instinct is driven by this kind of survival anxiety, which, almost always translates into pressure passed down the line to just make up the difference.
Which is exactly what makes the message we are exploring today so profoundly unusual. So, welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you've ever felt that pit in your stomach when the budget doesn't balance, or if you've ever felt the really heavy burden of institutional pressure, well, this conversation is for you.
It really is.
We are unpacking a remarkably inviting pastoral letter today. It's titled The Path of Provision, Trusting God in Every Season. And, it was written to a church family that was facing a very real financial deficit.
Right, an actual tangible shortfall.
Yeah, but instead of a cold, guilt-driven fundraising pitch, the message just completely subverts expectations. It shifts the entire conversation away from, obligation and moves it toward compassion, trust, and understanding.
And, what stands out immediately is the catalyst for this message. The leadership had reported that financial contributions across their division were running below projections for the year.
Which is usually panic mode.
Oh, absolutely. That is a moment that usually triggers total panic. Yet the pastoral response here is to deliberately hit the brakes.
Yeah.
The leadership makes this conscious choice to just look past the deficit on the spreadsheet and focus entirely on the people sitting in the pews.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to dig into the psychology of that for a second. When we experience financial scarcity, our brains naturally enter a fight or flight state.
We feel isolated. Yeah.
Right. We feel isolated, we feel ashamed, and we often project that shame right onto our spiritual lives. But there is this incredibly comforting line early in this message that tackles that shame head on.
It's a really crucial moment in the letter.
It is. It clarifies that a shortfall in giving does not equal a shortfall in faith.
What's fascinating here is how that distinction dismantles so much historical religious guilt.
Oh, totally.
Because in a lot of traditions, there's this subtle insinuation that if your financial contributions drop, well, your spiritual temperature must have dropped as well.
Like God is checking your receipts.
Exactly. But this letter fundamentally severs that connection. It recognizes that a drop in giving is rarely a rebellion. It is almost always a reflection of an invisible, real-world struggle.
Like somebody lost a job.
Right, somebody lost a job, or a family was hit with a massive, unexpected medical bill. People are being stretched by these economic pressures that nobody else can even see.
Think about a healthy family dynamic, right? If a member of the household suddenly can't chip in for groceries one month, your first instinct isn't to drag them into the living room and, interrogate their loyalty to the family.
No, of course not.
Your instinct is to ask what happened and how you can help. And by prioritizing the person over the projection, this message does something radical to our understanding of who God is in the midst of a crisis.
It really reframes the whole relationship.
Right. Wait, let me rephrase that. How does this message explain God's reaction to our financial disruption? Because if God isn't up there with a clipboard auditing our faith, how does this leadership characterize him?
Well, the message actually anchors this in the book of Deuteronomy, specifically chapter 8, which mentions that God gives the, quote, power to get wealth.
Okay.
And the theological deduction made here is just fascinating. If God provides the capacity to generate wealth, and that capacity is suddenly disrupted by hardship, God's response is not disappointment.
Wow.
His response is deep compassion. It changes the entire framework from, God as an angry accountant to a father who intimately understands the economic pressures crushing his kids.
I have to stop you there, though.
Okay.
Because when I hear phrases about God wanting us to have wealth or wanting to prosper us, my guard instantly goes up.
Sure. I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately picture flashy televangelists in $1,000 suits using a stage like a late-night infomercial to ask for credit card numbers.
It's the whole seed faith thing.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. How is this letter defining prosperity in a way that isn't just a spiritual get-rich-quick scheme?
That is the essential tension, really.
Yeah.
And the author of this message navigates it very carefully. The letter explicitly distances itself from the prosperity gospel.
Good, because that baggage is heavy.
It is. The prosperity gospel essentially turns God into a vending machine, or maybe like an investment portfolio managed by a strict algorithm. Like, if you input a certain amount of faith or cash, you are guaranteed a sports car in return.
Right. Name it and claim it.
Exactly. But true biblical prosperity, as outlined here, is fundamentally different. It's really about holistic well-being.
Holistic meaning it's not just about the zeros in the bank account.
Yes, exactly. The text draws on the Apostle John's third letter, where he prays that the believers would prosper in all things and be in health just as their souls prosper.
So it's tied to the soul.
Right.
Oh.
It connects material stability directly to physical and spiritual health. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the clearest illustration actually comes from the Psalms.
So with Psalm 1, right?
Yes. The message highlights Psalm 1, which paints a portrait of a person who is deeply rooted in God's Word. The text describes this person as a tree planted by rivers of water, yielding fruit in its season. And it promises that whatever he does shall prosper.
Okay, let's unpack that tree analogy because I think it completely changes the mechanism of how we view success.
How so?
Well, a tree isn't frantically checking the stock market, you know? A tree's prosperity is entirely agricultural. It's all about the root system.
That's a great point.
And like in a forest, trees actually share nutrients underground through mycelial networks during a drought. So their prosperity is their stability and their ability to sustain the ecosystem around them.
That imagery captures the exact intention of the letter. God's design for his people isn't a life of chronic shortage or fear or hoarding.
It's a rooted abundance.
Exactly. The prosperity being offered here is the stability to weather a storm and the capacity to provide shade for someone else.
But if I'm supposed to be this deeply rooted tree and my leaves are currently turning brown because I literally can't pay my rent this week, what do I do?
That's the real practical struggle.
Yeah, because if we know God is compassionate and desires our rootedness, how does this message advise a struggling person to actually communicate with him in the middle of a financial panic?
Well, the pastoral instruction transitions from the theology of provision directly into the mechanics of prayer. The specific invitation to the congregation is to engage in what the author calls expectant prayer.
Expectant prayer.
Right, and this is presented as the direct opposite of worried or frantic prayer.
The mechanism of expectancy is interesting because frantic prayer feels like, dialing an emergency hotline in an absolute panic, terrified that nobody's going to pick up on the other end.
Oh, yes. It's breathless.
But expectant prayer is like calling a trusted friend who already promised to give you a ride to the airport. You aren't pacing the house chewing your fingernails. You're just sitting on your porch with your bags because you possess their word that they are coming.
That is a perfect analogy.
But how do we actually bridge the gap between panic and expectancy when our nervous system is screaming that we are in danger?
This raises an important question about how we view God's character. You bridge that gap by anchoring your mind to established promises, which, honestly, functions a lot like cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, really? How so?
You are actively redirecting a spiraling thought pattern toward a grounded truth. The message offers two specific anchors for this. The first is Malachi chapter 3, where God issues a rare challenge to his people to actually test him in faithful giving.
Right, promising to open the windows of heaven.
Exactly, and pour out overwhelming blessing. And the second anchor is the Apostle Paul's assurance in the book of Philippians that God will supply all needs according to his riches. The instruction here is to actively bring these specific promises into your prayers.
So you are essentially praying the promise back to the promiser.
You are. And by doing so, you aren't trying to convince a reluctant deity to help you. You are reminding your own anxious mind of God's consistent track record.
You're engaging with a character who does not change.
Precise.
That makes total sense for the person who is currently drowning. But wait, if God is offering this deep comfort to the struggling, What happens when you aren't struggling?
Right.
Like, what if my leaves are super green right now, my job is secure, and my bank account is totally fine? Does the dynamic of trust change for the person in a season of stability?
The letter pivots to address that exact demographic next, and the approach remains deeply pastoral.
I'd hope so.
It really is. For those in a season of stability, there's an invitation to lean into the joy and the privilege of giving. But again, the framing is vital here.
It's not a guilt trip.
No, not at all. This is not presented as an obligation to balance the conference books. It is an invitation to plant seeds. The author points to the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, describing generosity as something that is given back, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over.
So what does this all mean for the listener who wants to be generous but still wrestles with that natural human fear of letting go of their resources?
Because that fear is very real.
It is. We are conditioned to protect what we have. How does this message help someone cross the bridge from the fear of subtraction to the actual joy of generosity?
Well, the answer lies in the psychological difference between a transaction and a relationship.
Okay, say more about that.
The message draws heavily on the book of Proverbs to explain this. Proverbs chapter 3 frames giving as an act of honoring the Lord with your possessions. When we treat giving like a transaction, like I put $1 in the offering plate to get $2 back next week, we are operating on conditional terms.
And transactional relationships are inherently stressful.
Exactly. You're constantly calculating, did I give enough? What if I need that money tomorrow? Did the algorithm register my sacrifice?
It's exhausting. It's like constantly calculating whether you left a big enough tip to ensure the waiter doesn't hate you. There is absolutely no peace in it.
None. And that brings us to Proverbs chapter 10, which the letter highlights as a key principle. It states that the blessing of the Lord makes one rich and, quote, he adds no sorrow with it.
Adds no sorrow. That is powerful.
That phrase is everything. God's provision does not come with a side of anxiety or a looming sense of dread. Relational giving, chipping in because you trust the head of the household and love the family, breeds profound peace.
Because you aren't just paying a bill.
Right. You are participating in an ecosystem of unconditional support, not feeding a meter to avoid a parking ticket.
That distinction elevates the entire concept of a budget, doesn't it? It means that when you write a check or, when you set up an automatic transfer on your phone, you aren't just covering the light bill for a building. You are stepping into something much larger.
It becomes a divine partnership.
Yeah.
The culmination of this pastoral appeal makes it clear that giving, whether from a place of deep hardship or comfortable stability, transcends the church budget entirely. It is fundamentally an act of worship.
Think about the incredible dignity that gives you as a listener. The totally mundane act of managing your finances is transformed into a sacred collaboration with the creator of the universe.
And the author validates the sacrifice of everyone involved, noting that even faithfulness in difficulty is a powerful testimony.
The widow's mite.
Yes. The widow, who can only give a tiny amount because she is stretched so thin, is participating in the exact same divine mission as the wealthiest donor.
It levels the playing field completely.
It does. The message synthesizes this beautifully by connecting Paul's writings in Corinthians that God makes all grace abound. So we have an abundance for every good work with the mandate in Joshua chapter 1 to meditate on the word and walk in trust.
So we've traveled a really fascinating road today on this deep dive. We started by looking at the typical panic-driven response to a financial shortfall, and we've explored a remarkably different landscape.
A much healthier landscape.
Absolutely. We've seen a leadership team choose empathy over economics, reminding us that a shortfall in your bank account is not a reflection of a shortfall in your faith.
Which is such a liberating truth.
It really is. We've examined how the human nervous system reacts to scarcity, and how expectant prayer, anchoring ourselves at the consistent character of God, can actually calm that internal storm.
And we've also seen this shift from transactional anxiety to relational peace. The ultimate desire outlined in this message is for you to be like that deeply rooted tree.
Prospering holistically.
Right. Prospering holistically, totally free from the frantic worry of scarcity, and invited into the joyful, peaceful privilege of generosity.
So whether you are facing invisible hardships that nobody else in your life knows about, or you are standing in a season of great stability, this message is an invitation specifically for you.
It really is.
It asks you to view your resources, your struggles, and your blessings through the eyes of a father who truly delights in his children and intimately understands their pressures.
It is an appeal to just drop the heavy burden of panic, to move forward in purpose, knowing that God has never once left his work unsupported.
Which leaves us with something incredibly practical to chew on as we wrap up today. If we truly believe that giving is a measure of our relationship with a compassionate God, rather than a cold transaction with a strict auditor checking the red ink on a ledger, well, how might that change things for you this week?
It changes everything.
If the pressure of the transaction is gone, how might that free you up to generously offer not just your money, but your time, your forgiveness, and your grace to the people around you? Something to think about. Until next time.